Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
As Prince famously sang, sometimes it snows in April.
Well, looking out my north end window, Sven, he was right about that.
Yeah, well, he was from Minneapolis and all, so he would know. But this is your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, April 15th, 2020. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jairus Days. There are lots of headlines to update you on today, but first, here are the latest numbers on the coronavirus from the state of Michigan. There are now more than 28,000 coronavirus cases in Michigan, adding more than 1,000 overnight. 153 more people have died in the last day, bringing the overall death toll to 1,928. There is some good news in that this new case number seems like it might be a sort of flattening if it holds. The most fatalities are in the city of Detroit with 475. The rest of Wayne County has more than 400 deaths, and Oakland County is closing in on 400. Macomb has 330 fatalities. You're now seeing more than 100 confirmed cases in outstate counties of Michigan, like Berrien, Calhoun, Clinton, and Monroe. St. Clair has more than 220 cases, Ingham 270, Saginaw more than 300, and Kent has more than 350 cases. The state of Michigan is getting a loan of ventilators from two states. The state of New York is sending 100 ventilators our way, and the state of California, 50 ventilators. California has been what medical experts call flattening the curve of new cases and deaths, in part because of a quick action when it comes to social distancing measures. Here are a couple of examples of how California has accomplished hundreds fewer coronavirus cases per day than Michigan, while having 4 times the population that we do. In San Francisco, there was a state of emergency declared back in February. This has resulted in just 857 coronavirus cases and 13 deaths in the city as of a couple days ago. For context, the city of Detroit is about the same size as far as population, but not similar in access to health care and income, and has more than 7,000 cases and more than 400 deaths. While here in Michigan, there are protests at the state capitol around the governor's stay-at-home order, and we'll talk about those in a moment, the LA Times reports that 95% of Los Angelinos in a recent poll support their shelter-in-place order.
Wayne County has worked with the city of Southgate, Quest Diagnostics, and Walmart to open another drive-thru testing site in the region. It'll be in the parking lot of a Sam's Club in Southgate. It opens tomorrow at 15700 North Line Road. It'll be open to residents who are exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19, as well as to all first responders and healthcare providers, whether or not they have symptoms. Results will come back within 2 days. To get an appointment for a test, you need to go to myquestcovidtest.com. Of course, we will put a link to that in the show notes.
It's not just the economy and population of the city of Detroit that has been hurt by the coronavirus, it's the municipal budget. As the federal government has not made a plan to support local municipalities who have had to spend and lose revenue to fight the spread of COVID-19, Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan has to plug what's expected to be a whopping $350 million budget hole.
Ouch.
He says the cuts will not impact first responders, but they will slash a number of things, from improvement projects to blight reduction to laying off 200 employees. And some 900 city employees will be reduced to working just 4 hours a week. This would allow them to keep their health care benefits. Many of these workers are traffic enforcement workers, building permit and code staff, and those who do road repairs. The city will also use their $100 million surplus that's been saved from the last few years. The drastic measures are required, or else the city would go back under state oversight.
As Jer mentioned, hundreds and perhaps even thousands of protesters descended on the state capitol building today in Lansing. It was called Operation Gridlock. It was organized by the Michigan Conservative Coalition, which urged protesters to remain in their vehicles. Protesters displayed signs that read things like "Liberty once lost is lost forever." There were other protesters carrying Trump-Pence signs. And Jer, I even saw a sign somebody held that said Heil Whitmer, the governor's last name spelled incorrectly, and a rather crude attempt to draw a swastika, which is rather distasteful.
To say the least. Many of these protesters were actually outside of their vehicles, and you had mentioned that they urged people to stay in their cars, but that just wasn't the case. Yeah, they didn't. That was not the case. Often when you look at the footage from many reputable sources, folks were standing less than 6 feet apart. I saw folks hugging, and most were not wearing masks.
No.
And so it's interesting to me to see a protest like this that's about, well, we can responsibly social distance, but there was not social distancing. This is something that gets me personally, and I don't want to go too far on this, but many reports said that the protesters didn't believe that they were at risk. When I've been talking to people and engaging with folks, I've been hearing a lot of the same thing. I just got to tell you guys, anyone listening, I've had 2 friends battle this who've died, and I have 2 relatives currently battling COVID-19. And it is real. It is not a joke. And all it takes when it comes to these protesters is one of those people to have symptoms in this entire mess. And, this is an extremely highly contagious virus. And with the number of people that were protesting, statistically, if you look at the spread rates and you look at the death rates, there will be a number of those that may die.
Yeah, indeed. As you mentioned, a lot of protesters were not wearing protective face masks, not respecting social distancing guidelines. We saw at one point, we were watching the live stream. We saw at one point somebody who had a uniform on that identified him as a Michigan State police officer. He was riding a bike, actually approaching and hugging a demonstrator, which is, kind of shocking, in terms of if you think about, leading by example, not doing a good job at that. But meanwhile, I would just point out that Governor Whitmer has confirmed that she's been in talks with the governors from Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois to take on kind of a regional Midwest approach to reopening the economy eventually. Which is kind of interesting. There hasn't been a lot said about it. The governor has basically only confirmed it, and that's all. I would just point out that Indiana and Ohio are way behind both Michigan and Illinois in terms of total number of confirmed cases reported overall. I don't know enough about what's going on in those states to say why that is, but there we have it. The governors of both Ohio and Indiana are Republican, whereas Illinois' governor is a Democrat like Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, Sven, the Detroit automakers aren't building any actual vehicles right now, but there is a lot going on in terms of the arsenal of health, as they're calling it. What's the latest on Ford's coronavirus effort?
Right. So Ford is now partnering as their newest thing. They're partnering with Wayne State, the Wayne State University Physician Group, and Access. That's the Dearborn-based human service organization, nonprofit for Arab American residents. Ford is basically supplying a fleet of Lincoln Navigators and drivers through Ford X. That's its in-house incubator for mobility startups. They're going to basically be conducting mobile coronavirus tests. The other partners in this, Wayne State, the Physicians Group, and Access, are supplying medical personnel and equipment, including Wi-Fi modems and a power source to be able to conduct mobile coronavirus test kits. They apparently have capacity to do 100 tests per day with results expected in 24 to 36 hours. You don't need a prescription to go these. These are intended, by the way, for first responders, healthcare workers, and others who are symptomatic, showing signs of symptoms. The plan is to start it in Southeast Michigan and eventually expand to cities including Lansing, Grand Rapids, and Battle Creek.
Well, this is, of course, just one of many efforts that Ford is spearheading on coronavirus, right?
Right. We've been talking about it, so I won't go through all of them, but the main things, they launched production this week of powered air purifying respirator. It's kind of a hooded unit that's taking place down in Flat Rock. Next week, they're planning to start production of ventilator units. And then, I spoke just the other day, earlier this week, about how they're partnering with an auto supplier to make reusable medical gowns out of airbag materials, which is kind of an innovative reuse of that fabric.
General Motors is making moves as well around this, aren't they?
GM said yesterday it's begun producing ventilators. It's making a model designed by a Florida company in partnership with GE Healthcare. They said this week they're going to ship 600 units this month to the Strategic National Stockpile. They will have all 30,000 that are required under their contract with the federal government by the end of August. In non-coronavirus news, we're going to get a step closer to the Detroit Riverwalk, connecting all the way from downtown to Belle Isle. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy have decided to share costs on a $2.9 million cleanup project. It will involve treating 13,000 yards of contaminated sediment and capping the site of the old Uniroyal tire plant to stop heavy metals from Detroit's industrial yesteryear from leaching into the Detroit River. This is that site, Jer, on East Jefferson, right adjacent to the MacArthur Bridge leading over to Belle Isle.
And to be clear, we're not talking about the heavy metals that play at Harpo's.
No, that's a different subject, different kind of heavy metal there. The goal is to have this big cleanup project done no later than the early part of 2022. That definitely sounds ambitious. In related news, the EPA last week said that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative would get an additional $20 million more from Congress during the current fiscal year. The extra money will go toward efforts to delist the Detroit River and 42 other areas of concern in the Great Lakes Basin. Plus, it will fund programs to fight invasive species, restore wildlife habitat, and other programs.
On Monday, Governor Whitmer instructed the Michigan Liquor Control Commission to buy back spirits from bars and restaurants affected by the shutdown. Joining us with details is food contributor Randy Walker. Randy, why is this important to Michigan businesses?
Well, this buyback should help offset some costs. You'll recall that the shutdown happened right before St. Patrick's Day, so a lot of bars and venues had already stocked up in anticipation of high sales for St. Patrick's Day parties.
So you're thinking, like your Jamesons and all that kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
So about how many establishments are we talking about here, Randy?
There are some 8,500 establishments with on-premises liquor licenses.
If a bar, restaurant owner or manager is listening to this, what do they really need to know?
Well, the most important thing is that there's a tight deadline. These venues have until 5 p.m. Friday to submit the form, and we'll put a link to that form in our show notes.
Yeah, that is one ugly URL. What is eligible for this buyback?
Eligible bottles are those that are unopened, sellable, and were purchased before March 16th.
So basically, in the future, they could go ahead and sell these back to some other bars and restaurants and things like that.
In fact, yes, these venues are required to hold on to these bottles until picked up by the MLCC. So in theory, they could buy back the stuff that they already have in their venue that they've been holding, waiting for the MLCC to pick up.
Interesting. Well, thank you, Randy.
You're welcome.
On a related note, Monday we interviewed Robin Cleveland of Northern Aquavit about a petition to allow the sale of spirits to go. That story since then has been picked up by quite a few media outlets. If you want to sign that petition, you can see our website for a link.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting Daily Detroit. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.